All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the NewBlue FX Mastering Video Titling in Minutes webinar. If you have any questions, sorry, my name is Adam Dolan, and I'm here with Travis White. He's our VP of Products, and I'm our Marketing Manager here at NewBlue FX. If you have any questions today during the webinar or after the webinar, or would like to share with your followers on Twitter, use the hashtag TitlerPro4 with the handle @NewBlueFX. In addition, you can ask questions during the presentation by using the comments section below the video. We will pause briefly at the end of each section to answer a few of your questions, and as well as at the very end of the presentation to answer any other additional questions that you may have. At this point, I would like to introduce Travis White, Manager of Products at NewBlue FX. Travis has more than 15 years of experience in video and 3D applications. He has developed more than 30 products and worked as a Hollywood editor. Today, he's going to show you how to master video titling in minutes with TitlerPro4. Travis, welcome.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it. What I'm going to do is show you a couple bullets of what we're going to learn today, and we're going to work through from scratch. We're going to work through 4 different titles that will give you a great survey of Titler Pro if you are new to Titler Pro or you just got it and you want to see what it can do. And for those of you who've been working with Titler Pro, we're going to show you many of the new features found in Titler Pro 4. So if we go through the bullets here, you'll be learning how to build titles from scratch. I don't have a lot of pre-prepared, so you'll see from the ground up, so you really get to learn from this webinar. We're also going to show you what it means to do a PSD import, and that means bringing Photoshop layers in and getting them animated and positioned just how you want. We're also going to learn about a new set of layout tools that are part of Titler Pro 4. This is definitely user feedback. A lot of you guys have really asked for different abilities for alignment and those kinds of things, and we're going to show you that. And then I'm going to show you what's called smart text alignment. And you probably don't get the concept of it there from that simple phrase, but you definitely will when we get into that. We're also going to show some new workflows and enhancements in our quick edit tool. And those of you who are familiar with Titler Pro, you know that this is a really unique workflow that lets you make edits in one template, and those edits ripple through many titles, makes things very efficient and easy. And we're going to show you the improvements in quick edit. And finally, we're going to show you about performance enhancing cache features. So there are some new ways to control your quality, control your performance, and especially in your video editing application of choice, how to really get some nice flow with your workflow. So without further ado, we'll dig into our application. Today we're working in Adobe Premiere Pro, and we're going to learn about beer. We have a project here that let's say you have a promotion or what have you, and we're going to use this setting being that we're from San Diego and San Diego's taking all the awards around the world about beer. We're going to dig into that as just our sample material. So the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and get into an intro title. Now this intro title can be the open to your show. Notice I have a nice pour in the background here, and this will be a nice backdrop for our title coming in. And in this title, we're going to specifically focus on EPS import, for those of you who aren't familiar with that. So bring in EPS vector files and a new feature of Titler Pro 4, which is OpenEffects importing or using OpenEffects inside Titler Pro. And we're going to use GenArt Sapphire to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and from my bin, drag and drop a title onto the timeline. So here we have enter text. I'm going to double click that and open up Titler Pro 4. So first we want to set up our title here. So let's just type something, beer craft. Let's say that this is the show or what's going on here. Now what we'll want to do is change our font to something that's pleasing, maybe Bernard, and size that up a bit. Notice I'm using the workspace handles to get that done, although there's sliders over here on the object tab as well. If you notice I move that up and down, you can see those sliders changing right as I'm working with that. Now, one thing I'm going to do here is beer and craft. They're a little too far apart, so I'm going to change my leading. So I'm going to drop that down to, let's say, 75. So beer and craft are nicely situated together. I'm also going to hold Shift to drag up and down. Now, I didn't have to hold shift, but it would be freeform in X and Y. But if I hold shift, that means it only travels in the X or Y that I began to travel in. So that's a nice tip for you guys to be laying out titles. So I also want this beer craft to kind of pop off the screen a bit. So I'm going to go to the Style tab. Just a bit of a review for those of you who aren't familiar with Titler Pro. The Style tab is where you develop the style of your characters or your other graphic assets. And right now we have one style layer. It's called 3D Face at the moment. This looks like 2D, but everything's always 3D in Titler Pro. So we'll drop that down and we'll see that the face is white. We're just going to leave it like that. And there's a lot of features here that you can work with to develop your style. We'll get into that later in another title that we're going to do today. But the one thing I do want to do is I want to add one more style layer under the 2D element in shadow. Pop there. We got a shadow in the background, and that's going to really make our title pop here. So the next thing we want to do is apply an open effect. An OFX plugin. So let's go to our library, and under there's a lot of different things in the library. You have effects, you have lighting, you have paragraph templates, which we'll get into a little bit later. That's basically a paragraph. The green bounding is a paragraph, and it has all the different elements, transitions, effects, all concatenated together in that one paragraph. We also have shapes, styles, templates, and transitions. What we're going to go into is effects. And we're going to drop down and notice that GenArt Sapphire has been recognized and brought up into Titler Pro. And there's a particular effect in here in the distortion category called Puddle, which is pretty appropriate, being that we're swimming in beer here. So if you just hover over a preset, notice I just put my mouse over that preset, you already get an instant preview of what that effect is going to do. And the timeline of Titler Pro, you see at the bottom, is already playing to show you what that effect is going to do. So to apply this effect, we could double click, or we could also drag and drop to our object, and now we have the effect. The great thing in Titler Pro, not only you have all the parameters of this warp puddle coming in here, you can also turn on keyframing. So let's maybe go back to the first second, and let's turn on keyframing here, and you'll see that we now start getting a keyframe list. So we could apply a keyframe at this point, and we could go up to the top here, and the only parameter that I care to manipulate is the amplitude. So I'm going to dial down that amplitude to something a little bit more subtle, maybe there. Let's see. Let's play that. There we go. You know what? It's not quite subtle enough. Let me pop that up, or a little too subtle. There we go. We're going to be swimming in beer. Good enough. So here we have this effect keyframe being its parameters over time. Now I want to bring Beercraft into the scene somehow. So what I'm going to do, and this is a bit of a review for those of you who do know Titler Pro, I'm going to go back to the library, close down effects because I want to get into the transitions category. And there's this great set of animations that you can use, one of them being fly past. So it's fly past your head from behind you down to the scene. So I can simply hover over a preset, and now we see what that does. It drops the title right into the scene. So double click or drag and drop to the timeline even. Do that. So we'll go back and play this, and here it comes into the scene. Great. Well, we want to build this up to a little bit more of a logo. So we're going to go into our file, and we're going to import a vector file. And this is the ability to bring EPS files into your scene. So I'll go into my folder, and I'll bring in this EPS file. Now, this file has a number of independent, if you see me clicking on them, independent closed vectors. And what Titler Pro is going to do is when it sees a closed vector, it's going to think of it as another character of sorts. So let me right click and select object parent, and that's the ability to get up to the whole object here. And we can click this XYZ handle, in fact, and really start manipulating this in 3D space to see what it's going to be like. Now, one thing I can do here is I won't get into developing the style on this one. We'll develop styles on another title. So what I'm going to do is simply go to the Styles tab and use one of the new features found in Titler Pro 4, and that's ability to make your own folders in the library. You can right-click and do New Category, Paste Category. You can right-click on an object or a preset that you made and cut, copy, delete, rename, open the containing folder. But I'm simply going to hover over this golden brown preset that I have. And so this is a style preset. I could double click and get it applied right there. And now in the object tab, I'm just going to click the rotation because I want to reset my rotation, the reset button right here, back to where it was originally, maybe size it down a bit. Now, right now the leaves are over Beercraft. This is one of the conventions in Titler Pro that we want to really emulate a lot of the experiences you have in a video editing application, and one of those being track order. So these leaves, what I want to do is drag them down to a lower track, and now they're behind the Beercraft text. Let's size that up just a little bit. There we go. So now, let's say we play in, come down about here, and now we want these leaves to appear, but we want them to appear in an interesting way. So let's say, I'm trimming it here. We'll go to the library and see what kind of animation we can use. So let's go to transitions, because transitions is where you would bring in an element. We could do like a fly in per se. Maybe falling letters. Notice how each leaf is coming in because it's falling letters, or just falling word, which will bring the whole thing in from the top. Or we could do something like pop. So big bounce, they all kind of bounce in. Or bouncing letters, we can use that. That's pretty cool. It's kind of creating that that structure around our logo. So we'll go ahead and drag and drop and apply that. And so now let's go back and play this title. Beercraft, the logo comes in, and we're good. So there you go. There's a quick view of what it means to use OpenEffects inside Titler Pro, as well as a bit of a review of what you can do with EPS imports and using simple things like transitions to do some really neat animations. So we'll go ahead and close this down. And here we are on our timeline. So this is probably a good point right here to open up for any questions that might have come in, and we can answer those, and then we'll get on to the other titles that we're developing.
Thanks, Travis. One of the questions we had was, basic one here, is what NLEs is Titler Pro 4 compatible with at the moment?
At the moment, all of them. So what we're compatible with is, of course, Adobe Premiere Pro. We're also compatible with Avid Media Composer, Grassfile Edius, Sony Vegas. We're compatible with Resolve, Blackmagic's Resolve. We're compatible with Scratch. We're compatible with, so there's a lot of compatibility out there. So Final Cut Pro. So if you're editing on it and it's a professional editor, most likely we're there.
Thanks, Travis. Another question was, you had mentioned something regarding compatibility with Sapphire. Were there any other plugins that were compatible with, that Titler Pro 4 are compatible with?
The OpenEffects support just came out, and we just launched this, what was 2 weeks ago, a week and a half, something like that. Yep. So it's brand new out there. We worked with GenArt Sapphire to become available, and be looking out for additional OFX plugins to become available as they quote unquote whitelist us. I mean, you know, each of the plugin manufacturers tends to say, okay, we've tested on this platform, we will enable being viewed. And so we're working with the various OFX plugin manufacturers to make that happen. So just keep in touch, and we'll be letting you know as more of them come online. And
I'd like to add that our own set of plugins all are compatible with Titler Pro 4.
Yes, definitely. As has been the case the whole time Titler Pro has been out. All of the NewBlue effects plugins that you might use in your video editing application in the timeline, they also do double duty as effects and transitions inside Titler Pro.
Another question we had was, can I add texture or color to individual aspects of the EPS file?
Yes. In fact, I didn't get into that. I skipped that. But what we can do really quick is we can open up this leaf structure here, and we'll just click one of the leaves, and we'll go to Style. In fact, let me not click just one of the leaves. Let me right-click and do Select Object Parent. That means I'll get the whole object. And notice that the leaf structure is made of two style layers. One is that centerpiece, which is a certain face, and one is an outline. So let's do something like go into the gradient of the face, and we could, maybe yellow it up some. I don't know if that's going to look too pretty. Might make you want to hurl. But anyway, you can see how you can get that design made, as well as changing the gradient direction, and you don't have to just do gradients. You can do a single color or bring in a texture too, which I'll show you later.
And just, I think in addition to that question, something related here was, are you able to animate particular parts of the EPS file?
You can when it's seen as a character of an entire paragraph. What we don't have, for various reasons, actually, we don't want to bog you guys down. We want to keep you guys fast. So what we haven't done so far, and we're still debating it, but I don't know if we'll go there, is individual keyframing of individual EPS layers. I mean, there's a number of EPS vectors in this particular EPS that we brought in. But that said, you can always break them out into a separate paragraph and animate them independently with keyframes that way. But right now, it's the animations that have intelligence about how to move that. For example, if we go to this pop-up transition, notice that the apply to choice is set to letter versus word or line. And that's what makes each individual EPS shape sequentially do its animation based on your overlap and the other parameters within the transition.
Great. And I just want to add before we move on here that if you're watching along on YouTube, you can click on that be part of the conversation pop over on the video, and that will open up the interface. We're actually going to ask questions within that interface. You'll see that on the upper right-hand side. It's in a kind of a grid box area, and it'll have the Q&A open to you for asking questions. However, you can still ask questions below in the comment section. I'm watching along to make sure I answer back. It looks like most of the questions have come through Twitter. So we'll keep going, and just wanted to bring that up so you guys knew you can ask questions in a couple different places.
Excellent. Let's get on to another title, shall we? So this next one we're going to develop. In fact, here's how you make a new title in Premiere Pro. It's different in every video editor. Sometimes it's adding an effect. In this case, in Premiere Pro, it's adding a synthetic importer. Same place where you do a new sequence or do new colors, bar and tone, you do a new Titler Pro 4 instance. Let's get rid of that guy. Okay. All right, so we have a new instance here, and let's start developing something. Now, the first thing we want to do here in this section, we're going to do an infographic. And this is going to be raster asset heavy, and that means there's not going to be a lot of vector shapes, but rather there's going to be a lot of flattened raster elements that are coming from Photoshop. So we're going to bring in a PSD import. And I'm also going to show you in this title, in this infographic, a number of the new alignment tools that we have available in Titler Pro 4. So the first thing we do, let's go up to File, and let's do Import PSD File. So we'll go navigate to where that file is located, and we have this boards asset. Now, if I size this down a bit in the workspace, and again, I click the XYZ handle, so it's very convenient to rotate in space, you'll see that there's this PSD image sitting in our workspace. In fact, I could go to the style, and I could even bring up some extrusion here, and you can see kind of this extrusion on the edge. So we've already made this kind of a 3D element, which is kind of fun. But what we can also do with this, just like we did with the EPS import, where we did the individual animation of the leaves, we could do the same with individual layers from a PSD file. And each board here happened to be sliced out as a different layer in Photoshop. So if we go back to the library and we go to the transitions, animations, we can do something like a fly-in. So we could do falling letters maybe. It's kind of interesting. Or falling words. Just the whole thing. I think probably letters right is going to be a nice use. You can see what we could probably do here is this is going to be a full graphic that actually becomes a transition of sorts in your video production. So I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop. And now we have this great transition down here on the timeline that brings each board in. And again, each board is simply a layer coming from Photoshop. When you're working with this, by the way, the bottommost layer in Photoshop is the first animated asset. So just think about that. So bottom to top in the Photoshop layers is the sequence of animation when the animation takes over here. Well, I'm going to go back to the Object tab, and that's where I'm going to reset my rotation, because for this particular infographic, I want this as our background, not necessarily as our as a 3D oriented object. So I'm going to simply size this up so it takes up the whole screen. And now let's start bringing in some text. We want to develop our text here. So One is we already had an entered text element. Let me just drag that up to a higher track in the timeline, and now you can see entered text. So we're going to develop an infographic that honestly, I don't brew beer myself, so please don't flame me if I have the ratios wrong. But you can inform me. You can send in and tell us what's up here. So let's say the India Pale Ale, and we'll pick a nice font for this. Let's do something like we like Bernard. Here we go. We'll do Bernard here, and we'll just bring this to the top. And the nice thing, this is a review for some of you, but if you're new to Title or Pro 4, is this green bounding is this our whole paragraph. You can do a sub-selection of individual characters, and you can do the same positioning and rotation and resize that you can with anything else. So we could size this "the" down, and we could move this in space, and now we have an interesting layout for this India Pale Ale. So I want to go ahead and bring in another paragraph. So we can go down to just above the timeline over on the left and click Add New Paragraph. So we can do that. And let's say we need some yeast, and we want to position this somewhere. Let's position it. In fact, let's do this first. Let's go up to some of our new alignment tools. One of them is we had left, right, center for justification. So we'll do that. Obviously, it doesn't matter when you have one piece of text, but you'll see how it does matter. And then secondly, we have new alignment of top, middle, and bottom. So we can align by top. So now when I do those two, notice when I hit enter, yeast, hops,
barley,
and malt, and then hops. How's that?
Right.
There we go. All right. Thank you. Don't blame me. Okay. So let's go ahead and increase the leading. So we'll maybe find ourselves in the middle of the boards. In fact, let's go to the background and simply adjust our background. How do we want this? Because it was a little bigger than what I needed. That looks probably good. All right. So go back to our yeast, malt, and hops. And let's go ahead and create an alignment position. Now, one thing we can do is if I just get close to my title safe line, watch how it snaps. So we have snapping. You can also disable it with Alt, but we have snapping to the title safe. But let's say I want to bring that in just a little bit. I'm going to turn on our rulers, so show guidelines and rulers. And now, similar to Photoshop, I can drag in a guideline and go ahead and snap to that thing. So we'll open up our leading a little bit more to kind of be within each board. And there you go. One thing we want to do is change the font so we can keep all our style here. Berlin Sans, let's say. That looks good. All right. So we have this one alignment tool here. So let's go ahead and say, you know what? We want some measure. This is going to be infographic. We want some measure out here, and we want it to align to something. So let's bring in another alignment line and really line right up with our eye and the India Pale Ale. In fact, let's reposition that just back a bit. Boink. And we're going to bring in another PSD file. So import PSD, and we can bring in more beer. So this is another PSD file that each glass is another layer. So we can size this down and maybe position this somewhere. And let's get an animation on it. You've seen how this rolls, so let's quickly go to the library and go to animations and maybe pop-up, bouncing letters. That looks like a good way to bring in this graphic. We'll go ahead and drag and drop and apply. And let's shorten up that transition just a little bit so it's a little faster in the timeline. Doink. There you go. And now, tip, if you hold Control plus drag on an object, you can make a copy. And so I've just made 2 copies here. And now here's another great alignment tool. If you use Control and do a multiple selection, you can either do multiple selection down here in the timeline, or you can do it up here in the workspace and right click. You can choose to align left, let's say. And you can right click again and choose to align distribute vertically. So you have a great layout here. And as you have them all selected, you can come over and snap to this ruler guideline, this guideline that you've created. So these are great ways to lay out your subject matter. What I'm going to do is change this infographic a little bit by deleting some beer. So 1, 2, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that looks like an infographic. And now down here in the timeline, I'll probably want to cascade the sequence of these guys coming in. So I'll trim one of these guys and trim the next one even further. So let's see. There we go. We've got our 3 measures coming out. And now a great thing we want to do is, let's say we want to get the yeast, malt, hops, and India Pale Ale, or at least the yeast, malt, and hops all coming in. Let's go ahead and put a transition on those guys, maybe a fly-in. We'll do that fast ride again on yeast, malt, and hops. They're coming in that way. Let's see what our timing's like. There we go. Yeast, malt, and hops, we want to go to the transition tab, which we're already on because we just applied a transition, and change that to line by line. So now yeast, malt, hops comes in line by line. We want that to come in a little sooner, don't we? So we'll drag that out. And a little sooner still. And then a great feature of Titler Pro is the ability to right-click on an asset in the timeline, and you can copy the transition and go to India Pale Ale and right-click and paste that transition as an in. So you have these kind of things like India comes in too soon. Let's back her off. There you go. And now one thing I want to do here is I want to apply, they're not really popping very well. Let me turn off my my safe margins here. They're not popping all that well. I want to apply something that makes them pop. And a great way to do that is a drop shadow. Now, I showed you one kind of drop shadow in our intro title, which is simply a style layer. But in this case, I actually want to use one of the NewBlue effects. And I can do that by holding Control and doing a multi-select. And I can apply drop shadow to each one of them independently. Or I could also do this. This is new in Titler Pro 4. Right-click and group. So now I have a single group. If I expand that group and collapse that group, you can see how that works right there. And I can go into the library, effects. The elements category in NewBlue effects has great features that are like picture-in-picture and mapping images on stuff, as well as some cutaway, magnifying elements, and drop shadow is what I'm looking for. So I can simply pick that preset of add definition. That looks good. So now we've applied a drop shadow to the group layer, and all the children are getting that drop shadow. So there we go. This is a good place to stop. We're done with this particular title. Any questions that might have come in?
One of the questions was regarding the safe margins versus the one that you're using. Are there other options for safe margins with Titler Pro 4?
There are. In fact, if we turn on safe margins, let's do that there. You can go under, in fact, if we look at the pop-up, it says toggle safe margins, configure in view menu. So we'll go to the view menu, and you see a couple checkoffs that we can do. We can show safe margins or not. We can show crosshairs or not. We can show 4x3 or not. And then what you can do is, once you've configured what you want to see, let's see, you're not interested in crosshairs, but you definitely want to see 16:9 and 4x3. Let's say you're an editor that needs to prepare shows for broadcast, and one of your specifications that it needs to be appropriate on a 4x3 display. So you have that going on. And then as you toggle your safe margins on and off, you see your configuration that you set up.
Very nice. Another question was regarding the PSD import functionality and the aspect of lighting. So does lighting affect the PSD, or is that just on the titles that you're creating?
It does affect the PSD. And the reason being is that these PSD assets are really textures that have been mapped to really a 3D object sitting in space. So your light setup, our default light setup is just a really nice setup, and it doesn't necessarily make any particular mood. It's just, it really sets off bevels and textures quite well, but it looks rather clean. And that's what we're working with right now. We haven't messed with the lights at all. But do know that they will affect your textures because they're actually sitting on a 3D object.
Do you mind showing a quick example of how that would work with the lighting?
We will. In fact, in the next title, we're going to show how to work with some lighting.
Great. Thank you. And it looks like that's the questions we have for now. So let's get to it.
All right, let's keep going. Notice this analysis that's happening. I'm going to show you what that means later on. So let's get that second title down here into the workspace. Notice I have it on top of my video. If I go ahead and play this, I have this great transition where the boards fly in and our infographic pops in just like that. So now we're going to get to another piece here. Let's make a brand new title, new item, Titler Pro 4. And let's start building up a nice backboard. What we're going to do here is we're going to make a screen that sits a quote really nicely. And what we're going to be covering in this particular title is what it's like to match a scene with your title, match the background, and we're essentially going right into that question that you just got. What about lighting? What about bevels? How do I make stuff look real? And so we'll show one example of the considerations to think about to make that title look like it's in that space, and some of the tools that you have to make that happen. And we're also going to look at, in this title, the smart text fitting that I told you about earlier. And you're going to see how powerful this is. So first, let's go ahead and type out Beer Craft again. Let's get our font on there. Instead, let's the Berlin time. And we'll go ahead and change our leading so that's always a good tip. Keep your text according to the weight of your font. Get that leading, especially if it's a main title, in a way so it doesn't look like it's too open between lines. So the next thing we want to do is go ahead and size this guy up. In our scale, we could actually lock the scale and do something like 12, and we'll work with that later. But first, let's go and bring in a picture that we really want to match to, and this picture is going to be a background. So let's go to File, Import Image, and here's a nice wood texture that's put in the background. Now, this is the latest element I brought into my scene, so it got added at the top track. So I want to reorder my tracks so I have my text on top of that image. So this image has a nice wood grain in it. What's interesting, it's a flat image right now, or it hasn't been rotated in space, but the photography has a bit of a distance to it, an orientation. So we're going to want to match that. And so let's go ahead and start matching that orientation by clicking X, Y, and Z and start rotating that. Maybe, let's see. I did experiment earlier, and I can do a 1/24/7, something like that. So we can get this maybe down here. It still doesn't look quite right. One of the great features in the Scene tab that came in Titler Pro 3 is the ability to change your wide angle lens. So you can actually rotate this to be, or control this to be more or less quote unquote extreme with your lens. And so you can set this to something that really makes this fit a little bit more into the scene. And already you can see the beer craft is going with the wood grain and really starts to look like, okay, this is in the same world as this image. So we got that going on. Let's go ahead and start extruding this piece of text. So we'll go back to the Attributes tab, and we want to go to Style, because each style layer is what owns its own extrusion. For example, we can extrude it this way. So that wouldn't make a lot of sense right here, but maybe if we had a little bit of extrusion, let's say 5, let's dial in 5 there, that's going to start getting us somewhere. So let's size this up just a little bit more. Feels like it needs to be bigger, something like that. And we want to, I mean, a great way to do this right now is to bring the same texture that you had on the background into your text. So why don't we do that? So instead of color or gradient, let's pick a texture, and let's pick that very texture that we have as our background. All right, here we go. There it is. Now you're like, shoot, it doesn't look like it's really in the scene yet. Well, we have a little bit of work to do. First thing we want to do is maybe do some beveling on it. And so we come down here in this one style layer and we have this bevel control. Now you can right click and get some of the presets like a linear soft, which is the default one, or linear, which is quite hard, or maybe a single curve. That's good for woodwork. You know, you got that got that sanded down edge. And I know that this is going to happen. Watch when I increase the bevel size. Oh, I get a little bit of this strange behavior out of this particular font. It's like, that's not what I want. So this is a tip for everybody. If a font isn't really behaving well with your bevel, what you can do is work with the width of that font, which is basically a bolding or a thickening or a thinning, either way. And sometimes it'll take care of the vectors that are in that font. Not all fonts are high quality drawn, and they might have some strange Bezier moments in them that make them act a little wonky. So that's a tip for, let's see, I think 11 is going to do good for us for doing that. Now you see that nice little corner there? Now, one thing we want to do as well is we want on this layer to make it more or less shiny. So that's going to do something there, especially you can see right on those bevel edges, we have that nice shine appearing, and that helps us a little bit more. Because notice the texture in the background, it looks like there's kind of a bright light coming from the right-hand side. It's almost like window light, you know, hitting a table of sorts. And so we want to start emulating that. And so that's where we're going towards. Now, it still looks like it's floating off the table because there's no real shadow going on. One thing I do want to do, which I forgot to do, is let's stretch the image just to the whole paragraph. I'll show you what that looks like. So if we click on our texture control, you see each letter has the texture repeated over and over. If I simply click stretch to paragraph, now the texture is being used across the whole paragraph rather than being repeated. That is something that we want to do in this case. And there's this little kind of hard line on the text out of the image. Let me just size this up to get rid of that. That looks a little better. So we'll turn off our texture size handle and we're good to go there. Now, one thing that is really good for your text, especially from your face to your sides, is to create contrast. And one way we can do that is bring in an outline. So we've been working on one style layer. Let's go up into 3D and pick an outline and bring that in. So the first thing we want to do, let's say, is the layer depth. We might want to adjust that. And we want to pick a color that's going to be kind of nice. So let's just use the color picker here and pick one of the darker colors. There you go, something like that. You can muck with it a little bit, maybe darken it up even more. Yeah, something like that. So now you can already see that our text is popping because there's a contrast at that edge level. So let's go into, let's say, it's still not quite there. It's kind of dim, right? Well, here's another great tool to use to make your text match the scene. And if you go into the library, Titler Pro 4 actually comes with a number of new effects and animations that weren't previously in Titler 3 or 2. And so go into your effects, and under Essentials is something called Video Tune-Up. And if you just hover over these, you can see how you could get some wild looks out of them or some subtle changes. And we can go ahead and double click to apply this video effect to our title. And already it's like, okay, we're going somewhere with this, right? Let's set up our video tune-up to knock it down a bit, maybe around the 40s. And our brightness, we might want to knock that down a little bit, maybe something like that. And so now we're starting to get kind of a contrast that makes the text pop off of our background. But we really want to marry or glue this thing to the table, and we don't have that yet. So what we can do is we can go into one of the effects that we've already used. We can go into the library, go into the elements category, and use that drop shadow that we used previously. So we can pick a preset that might help us here. There's one that we can work with. Now, obviously, consider your texture or your video behind. It's like, where's the light coming from? We already talked about it's coming from kind of a high right. But not too high. It's mostly to the right. So what we can do is we can change our angle to get that drop shadow going where we need to be. And then we can bring in some feathering or some blur. and then change the offset a little bit to however we need that to be. So let's say 11 or so. And now you can see how it's really starting to sit in this scene. Lastly, we want to do a little bit of lighting adjustment, which we talked about earlier and we got a question on. So let's go to the scene tab, and I'm going to roll up the 3 lights, and we'll show you, if I turn these lights off, notice how light 3, that's really helping us with that bevel and those top edges. Let's turn off light 2, just kind of a general shine. Light 1, clearly our dominant light. So let's work with that one a little bit. So let's open up lighting 1, and notice these circles. In fact, if I click Beercraft as the object, notice the circle jumps over there. This is a really innovative way to control light. A lot of applications kind of have this God's eye view where you see the light source up in space and you have to zoom out and kind of think about your 3D space. What we do is we keep things as you're going to see them, and we give you a control to manipulate how the light is landing on your subject matter. So, for example, if I click the background, notice how the control reorients itself to the background object. If I click the Beercraft, the control reorients itself to the text object. And what I can do, just like the XYZ handle that we had before, imagine this is kind of like a bowling ball or a globe. We can roll the source of the light and where it's coming from. So we could do something like maybe this and that. My friend, I think, is looking pretty good. So it's just a simple tweak to the lighting. You also have a number of presets here that you could go through, but I'm happy. So we'll go back to the Attributes tab. And let's now, this is the whole background. We've just set up a nice style. The whole point of this one was actually to show a quote. So let's bring in a new paragraph. So we're going to add this paragraph, and I have a quote to add from a text file. Anyone can drink beer, but it takes intelligence to enjoy beer. Let's copy that and simply paste that in. And hey, look, this is our typical text mode. And what this is this lets text string out as long as you want until you hit a carriage return. Hit enter and you make different lines that way. And that's an explicit, strong way to set up your paragraphs. But sometimes you don't know. Maybe if you've set it up as a variable, which we'll get into, you don't know how long that text string is going to be. And sometimes it's kind of hard to pick the enter or the carriage return moments. So let's change our mode. In fact, first off, let's change our text so it looks a little cooler. Bellway light, there you go. All right, let's change our mode from the standard mode, which is fit box to text. That means the text runs and the box just says, okay, I'm being as big as you need. And we're going to change it to fit text to box. You get an orange bounding here. And watch this. I can size open the box, and I can start reducing the width of this box. And look what's happening here. The text is now conforming to my box. So let's do something. Let's use those rulers again, and let's bring in maybe a nice guideline here. Set that up. I'm going to hold Alt, which pulls one side while keeping the other side at the same position. And we could size this up a bit. There we go. That's a nice quote. We can bring it up in space. Maybe we can use our control drag again to make another version. And let's go ahead and bring the author into this thing. So that was Stephen Beaumont. Paste. There you are, Stephen. And notice even with, there's a couple things going on here. One is that it's wrapping text. And the other thing is if it doesn't quite fit, it actually knocks down the point size as well. So here we have a great way of putting two pieces of text in their position. And now let's make sure that their variables are set. So what is this? Well, variables are a way for you to create a design like this, this design here with this quote, and reuse that design with different text strings in the quick edit panel, which we'll get into shortly. But first off, let me just go into the object tab, And down here, text variable, notice that's turned on. What is this? This is the quote. So let's say we want to name this label so it makes sense to us. And what's this thing down here? Well, that is the author. Variable author. And Beercraft, I don't want that to change. So let's turn off text variable. And so Beercraft is not going to be exposed as a text string that a user can later edit. So let's go ahead and just close this thing down. Let's get this onto our timeline. And here we go. Here it is. And the last thing we want to do is let's have a nice intro to this whole thing, a nice animation that gets us in. Let's open this up again. And we will have Steven and this thing. Let's quickly do some things you guys have seen. You'll see how quick it is to work in here. Let's do a fade in. So let's fade linear on this guy. Let's fade linear on this guy. They can be slower, fast fades, let's say. That works. And now what I want to do is do a control to do a multiple selection. I also want to get that background. I'm going to right click and I'm going to group. And now that I've grouped, I can do a whole keyframing on this entire group. So let's say around 1 second. Turn on keyframing. Let's put a keyframe there. Let's back up a little more. And let's say that this element goes down a bit, let's say, and tilts. Let's see what kind of tilt do we want to do. There we go. Now this background's not big enough for me. Let's open up the group. I can continue to modify the background. So if I go to rectangle and size this up a little bit more there, that's going to take care of me. So we have this turn. And so let's go to our group line where we have all these keyframes. Get to the first keyframe. Turn on smooth interpolation here. And let's rotate this thing almost like a barn door. And let's bring it up in the scene. A little bit more rotation up in the scene. Let's see what we got. There we go. Nice barn door. It's a little slow. I want to make it faster. I'm just simply going to move my keyframes. Perfect. And so now let's say we want to use this way to get out of here as well. So let's put a keyframe back here. Just add one. Add one. Add one. And now we can do the fun thing of right-clicking and copying the properties of one keyframe. Go to the last keyframe and paste those properties. Go to the properties of the second keyframe and copy them. The fifth one, paste them. Third one, copy them. Fourth one, paste them. So let's see what we're going to do now here. Zoom. Got our text come in. And there goes the barn door. All right, so let's go ahead and close. Now we've got this great barn door happening. And what about this quote? Well, let's double click. And one thing I've done through this whole tutorial so far, this webinar, is I had gone into settings and set always open to title designer. That's not the default setting of Titler Pro 4. So let's go ahead and uncheck that and watch what the behavior is when we open up this title asset again. What you get is you get quick edit. And quick edit, by the way, under settings, you can jump back and forth between title designer and quick edit right here if you want as well. But what quick edit does is it gives you access to all the templates that ship with Titler Pro 4 that you can purchase as additional add-ons or that you make yourself and use them over and over again in your timeline. And notice, remember those variables that we were talking about? Well, here's the quote and here's the author. Now, the great thing is we set up the paragraph to be fit text to box, right? So let's now go, let's say we're doing a blog and we have the quote of the day, and now I have a much longer quote. So go ahead and copy that quote, and we will paste it in, boink, and hit enter. Check that out. The quote perfectly fits into that space. And what I really love is Abraham Lincoln made this quote. Copy, get Abe in there, paste. I'm a firm believer in the people. If given truth, they can be depended on to meet any national crisis. The great point is to bring them the real facts and beer. So good old Abe. So finally, let's go ahead and close that down. There's Abe in the timeline, and let's make 2 new title instances. We're going to open those up real quick. One, I'm going to put that down on my timeline here, and another one, put that down on my timeline. So what I'm doing is a workflow that says, you know what, I already have a lower third. I already have something that I want to work with, and now I'm just getting them on the timeline. So we have an enter text here, and we have an enter text here. Let me double click, and we're going to open up Quick Edit to do that. Notice the string of titles in our project. They're all here, including this enter text. Now what I can do is go to the Beercraft folder, which I made previously, and I can bring in my lower third. So let's go ahead and drag and drop. This is new features in Titler Pro 4 in the Quick Edit. It's a very convenient way to work. I can drag and drop a template to a title. I can go to another title, drag and drop that template, and oops, I did the wrong one. Let's do the lower third one. Bam. So there you go. So there's the 2 lower thirds I might want to do. Maybe this one we want to say something like, I don't know, good friends, enter. Notice how good friends applies. Are here. Notice how it gets smaller. And having fun. That is all because of that fit text to box mode. So you can see the power of that, especially when you're using templates. And we can go to this other title, and let's say one thing I didn't show you is exposing a variable of a texture. In fact, if we open up Title Designer, I'll show you how that's done. Here is the background bar. Well, let's review. With the Beercraft, notice the fit text to box mode that's on. Under the Object tab is where you find that text variable, and that one's called the title. Well, on a texture, remember styles are made of multiple layers that could be a color, could be a gradient, could be a texture. So we want to go into the Style tab and say, you know what, for this color gradient texture space, I want this to become a variable. So I check that off and give it a name. So let's go back to Quick Edit. And I could bring in a texture. Let's say a video for that matter. So let's see, we'll go back into our videos. And where's that guy? There's some beer for you. And you could have that flow there. Now, I'm just going to think that there's a video texture in here. It's not going to behave so well right when I put it in the timeline. This is where we get into caching. So we have 5 different titles in our project. And if you go under settings, none of them have caching enabled. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to enable caching for this lower third. I'm going to enable caching for the other lower third. And I'm going to enable caching for our intro title called Beercraft, enable caching. Now, each of these has another feature called render cache at close. And what this does, there's 2 types of caching you can do. If you have render cache at close enabled, this is going to be an explicit cache. It's going to happen right now. And we have an analysis that finds out what's moving and what's still, and it's going to optimize the render. And when it does a cache, it's going to cache to one of the new features in Titler Pro 4 is the ability to control your final render quality as well as your preview quality. So when we go to cache, we're going to cache to a final render quality, which is set to good right now. So I've just set 3 titles to render a cache. So when I go ahead and close Quick Edit, watch what happens. Analysis occurs, and then render occurs. And we're working on title 1. That's that sapphire effect and the leaves coming in and all that kind of thing. So we'll let that render right now. And what this enables you to do is these are renders on alpha. So no longer in your NLE timeline, when you hit play, does your timeline need to query Titler Pro and say, hey, render and create this title right now. It's like, you know what? I've already got an alpha cache set up and ready to go. And notice my renders are going right here. And the nice thing, because they're on alpha, you can reposition these in your timeline and it doesn't matter. So let's go ahead and back up and hit play. So here's our intro title. And there's that nice Beercraft, playing smooth, playing perfect. And I could even reposition it and hit play again. And it's smooth, no problem. And that's unlike when you would do a slice of your timeline and render the in and out. So we can go back to these lower thirds. And there they are, sliding in. Super nice. This next lower third, as you recall, is going to have that video in the background. Probably too much beer at that point. But you get the idea. So probably right now is a great time for further questions.
Thanks, Travis. One of the questions we had was regarding lighting. Are you able to keyframe lighting in Title Pro 4?
You are able to keyframe lighting. Just as you were able to keyframe paragraphs, it works exactly the same in the Scene tab.
Great. Another question was, does the quality of the texture matter?
It can matter. Oh, it does matter. Now, it matters for performance as well. If you have this huge texture that's just larger than what you really need, it's gonna bog down render. But in the same sense, if you have a small texture and you use something called environment map, which we didn't get into today, which is more of that shiny, glossy kind of thing, which really expands the texture, then you might see some of that macro blocking in the JPEG or in the PNG that you have. So it does matter. I mean, a rule of thumb is make a texture about the size of your sequence settings, and most of the time that works just well.
Now, the environment mapping is going to actually allow the lighting to play off the textures on the title. Is that correct?
The environment mapping, it's kind of like Chrome. Chrome's not a particular color. It's kind of like a mirror, right? So it mirrors the environment around it. And that's what environment mapping is. So you could make it look kind of chrome-ish or metallic, and it has that reflective quality. And that's different from light shining off the object. Light shining off the object is much more to do with the shininess of the layer. Now, there is another feature that we didn't get into, which is normal maps. And those are actually ability for when the light's coming down, the normal map gives a texture that the light can actually cause shadow and highlight on top of. And that's for another tutorial.
Very cool. And one of the questions regarding caching, are there different settings of caching?
Definitely.
For different levels of titles?
Yeah. So this particular cache right here, let's say we can open up the settings, and for one, you can enable or disable cache. I mean, one great thing is, like, if your titles are basic, they're text, your machine's beefy, you don't have to turn on caching. You can turn it off, and every next title that you make picks up the settings of your previous one, just so you know how that operates. Also, if you don't turn on render cache at close, what we do is we don't explicitly cache up front. In fact, let's undo that right now and simply close. It just closes. And what happens then is when you play the timeline, while we're playing the timeline, we're reading the frames now and picking up and caching the frames. So that's another way to work. You don't always have to explicitly render your cache before our UI closes. You can uncheck that, and then simply as we play the timeline in your NLE of choice, we're picking up the frames. It's not as optimized, but it's also another convenient way to work. It all depends on how you want to work. Some other elements in here, or some other features, is we have some quick tools like cache uncache titles, recache this title, cache all of them, enable or disable cache for all of them. And again, all of those caches are set to your quality setting. So you find the quality setting that's best for you. A lower quality is going to be faster renders, faster performance, but it might not. It might have some aliasing depending on the assets that you have. So do play around with your preview quality and your final render quality and find what's right for you. And sometimes, good is actually 90% of the time is a fantastic look, but you might find a title here or there that you want to up it.
Great. I think that's all the questions we have for now.
There you go. We've learned about beer, kind of. Thank you all for attending. I hope you've learned some good tips. I hope you've learned some power that's in Titler Pro 4. And let's go back to some of our slides here.
Thank you. And so as Travis was saying, thanks for joining. We appreciate it. If you'd like to learn some more information about Titler, you can visit our website at www.newbluefx.com. www.newblue.com/TP4web. Here you'll find a full list of features, videos, as well as we've actually broken out feature videos to kind of show little 30-second clips of kind of what Travis was going overall, but these are more on a very basic level of how to kind of navigate the different features in Tile Pro 4. Also, if you're looking for any information on tutorials or webinars, you can find those here as well. We have some links here. We have a tutorials at www.newfx.com support/tutorials, as well as if you have any questions that we didn't answer here today or that we don't get to on YouTube after the webinar, you can always email our support team at support@newblueinc.com. Again, that's support@newblueinc.com. But that wraps up for us here today. Thanks for joining us. We do appreciate it. Keep an eye out for the follow-up email that will include additional details as well as a full recording of the webinar. Again, this link that you have now that goes directly to YouTube can play the whole video. You can just scroll back and scrub through whatever section you want. It's very nice, but we'll have a nice finalized version that we'll be posting as well. We'll also be chunking up these into different tutorials. So, if you want to kind of just focus on a certain segment, we'll be breaking those up as well. So on behalf of Travis and I, as well as the NewBlue FX team, thanks for joining us and happy editing.